The first impact didn't sound like glass breaking. It sounded like a gunshot. Every window in the clinic exploded inward at once, a synchronized detonation of safety glass that sent surgical instruments spinning across tile floors and sent every caged animal into screaming panic. Before the last shard hit the ground, 4 masked men were already inside, moving fast, moving with purpose, swinging steel pipes at equipment worth more than most people's cars. And behind the reception desk, unable to run, unable to stand, Dr. Evelyn Carter sat in her wheelchair and watched her life's work get demolished in real time. They thought a woman in a wheelchair couldn't fight back. They hadn't met her dog yet. If you're new here, hit subscribe and follow this story to the end. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. And stay close, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about loyalty. The rain had been falling since before dawn. Ash Grove wasn't the kind of town that made weather forecasts worth watching. The clouds just came when they felt like it, settled over the valley like a wet wool blanket, and stayed until they were ready to leave. By 7:15 in the morning, the gutters on Millbrook Street were running fast and brown, carrying cigarette butts and crushed coffee cups toward the storm drain outside Ash Grove Animal Care, a single-story clinic wedged between a dry cleaner and a shuttered photography studio. The sign above the door was hand-painted. The parking lot held 4 spaces, 2 of which were cracked asphalt patches barely qualifying as such. The building itself had seen better decades. But the lights were on. The door was unlocked at 7 sharp every weekday, and the woman who ran it hadn't missed an opening day in 3 years. Dr. Evelyn Carter rolled through the back entrance at 6:48, her manual wheelchair tracking mud across the rubber mat just inside the door. She didn't bother wiping it. She'd clean it later. She always cleaned it later. She set her bag on the counter, clicked on the exam room lights one by one, and began her morning inventory. Gauze, syringes, ketamine locked in the cabinet, 2 surgical trays that needed restocking, a litter of rescue kittens in the back ward who needed their morning feeding. She moved through the clinic with the efficiency of someone who'd long since stopped needing to think about logistics. Every reach, every pivot, every transfer from chair to counter had been practiced into muscle memory. She was 31 years old. She had a doctorate in veterinary medicine, a shelf of certifications she never showed anyone, and a right leg that had been crushed below the knee 4 years ago when a pickup truck ran a red light and ended her ability to walk with 3 seconds of physics she hadn't seen coming. The accident hadn't broken her, but it had rearranged her. She'd rebuilt the clinic specifically for herself. Lowered counters, reinforced door frames, a custom exam table with a hydraulic lift she'd had retrofitted by a mechanic she paid in cash. She didn't talk about the accident. She didn't bring it up at consultations or explain it when new clients stared a half-second too long. It was simply what her life looked like now, and she had more pressing things to occupy her, like the folder on her desk. She picked it up, unclipped the binder, set it flat on the lowered section of the counter, and read through it for the 4th time since the weekend, though she didn't need to. She'd memorized the pages days ago. 12 animals. 4 dogs, 3 cats, 2 rabbits, 1 ferret, 1 parrot, 1 box turtle, all presented at various clinics across the county over a 14-month span, all showing signs of chronic stress injury, malnourishment patterns specifically around transport caging, and, in the case of 4 of the dogs, subcutaneous microchip removal scars. Someone had been pulling chips. That meant someone had been moving animals that belonged to other people and needed to make sure they couldn't be traced. 3 months ago, Evelyn had compiled everything, organized it into a coherent report, and hand-delivered it to Detective Ruiz at Ash Grove PD. Ruiz had been polite. He'd taken the folder. He'd said he would look into it. 2 weeks later, the first call came. Unknown number. Caller had kept it brief. "You should stay in your lane, doctor." She'd reported that too. Ruiz had suggested she might want to be careful. He hadn't elaborated on what that meant. A second call came 4 days after that. No words this time, just the sound of something being slammed repeatedly against a hard surface, steady and rhythmic, like someone demonstrating patience. Evelyn had stopped answering unknown numbers after that. She hadn't stopped building the case file. She slid the folder back under the counter as her vet tech, Marcus, came in through the back at 7:10, water dripping from his jacket, shaking his head like a dog. "Miserable out there," he said. "You say that every time it rains." because it's always miserable. He hung the jacket on the hook by the door and looked at the mud-tracked mat. You want me to clean that? When we get a second. When do we ever get a second? He wasn't wrong. Tuesday mornings were consistently chaotic, post-weekend emergencies, owners who'd let something go untreated until the guilt became unbearable, the rotating cast of strays brought in by whoever had found them. By 8 o'clock, they had a retriever with a festering paw wound, 2 cat spays queued for the afternoon, and a rabbit whose owner was quietly crying in the waiting area and trying to hide it. Evelyn moved through it all at her own pace, which was faster than most people expected. That was something she'd noticed, the recalibration happening in people's faces. The brief assessment when they walked in and found her behind the desk. The flicker of surprise or uncertainty, or what looked sometimes uncomfortably like doubt. As though a woman in a wheelchair couldn't tell a grade 3 tear from a grade 2, couldn't perform a clean intubation, couldn't read an x-ray with more precision than half the full ambulatory veterinarians in the county. She'd learned not to address it, just to work. At Nini 40, the door opened and a man walked in with a German Shepherd. Evelyn was at the front counter, entering notes when she heard the bell above the door. She looked up. The man was somewhere in his mid-30s, maybe slightly older, with a build that didn't come from a gym and didn't announce itself. Medium height, dark jacket, boots that had seen real weather. He carried nothing except a short leash attached to the dog at his side, and he moved with a stillness that people who hadn't been trained wouldn't immediately recognize. Evelyn recognized it. The German Shepherd moved with him in perfect sync, not pulling, not distracted by the smell of antiseptic and animal fear that saturated every veterinary clinic. The dog's ears tracked the room in controlled sweeps. Its gaze was bright and settled, and when the man stopped at the counter, the dog sat without being told. "Morning," the man said. He scanned the waiting area briefly, exits, blind spots, the gap between the counter and the wall, before landing on her. Natural, practiced, barely visible. "I called ahead yesterday. Titan's due for his annual. Ethan Cole." "Right." Evelyn found the name in the system. "He's current on everything except the Bordetella booster." "Yeah." She looked at the dog properly. German Shepherds came in every configuration. Anxious ones, aggressive ones, poorly socialized ones dragged in by owners who'd bought working-line dogs without understanding what they'd purchased. This one was different. The coat was dense and healthy, the weight distribution was right, the muscle tone along the hindquarters was what she'd expect from an animal with serious conditioning. But it wasn't the physical presentation that caught her attention. It was the scar, small, neat, behind the left ear. A pale raised line, maybe 2 centimeters long, barely visible beneath the fur unless you knew to look for it. She knew to look for it, because she had made it. Her hand stilled on the keyboard. She kept her expression even. "Can you bring him around?" she said. Her voice came out level. Cole guided the dog around the low gate and into the exam corridor. Evelyn followed, her wheels silent on the tile. She positioned herself beside the exam table, activated the lift platform, and gestured for Cole to put the dog up. Titan complied before Cole could signal him. Then the dog turned its head and looked at her. Not at the room, at her. Evelyn put a hand on the dog's flank, and Titan immediately shifted, pressing gently sideways into her hand, not anxious, not aggressive, just present, remembering. "He's usually tighter than this with strangers," Cole said, watching. "Dogs remember people differently than humans do," Evelyn said. She ran her fingers through the fur behind the left ear, found the scar. Let her fingertips rest there for 1 second longer than the examination required. "It's not always about the face." She kept moving. Weight, temperature, lymph nodes, ocular response, dental inspection. She was thorough, and she was fast, and she kept her expression neutral even when her chest was doing something complicated she didn't have language for. Because she had treated this dog. 4 years ago. Before the accident, before the rebuild, when she'd been running a mobile rescue operation out of a converted van in the eastern part of the county. A truck driver had found the Shepherd mix. Younger then, maybe 18 months old, thin past the point of dangerous, tangled in chain-link fence on the shoulder of Route 9. His left rear leg shattered at the tibia. She'd worked on him in the back of the van with a headlamp and borrowed surgical kit, stabilizing the fracture well enough to get him through the night. She'd spent the next 3 weeks nursing him through recovery in the van. She'd named him Bishop, privately, though she'd never put it on a collar. And then one morning, he'd been gone. Cage latch open, door unlatched, and no sign of how or who. She'd filed a police report. Nothing had come of it. She hadn't thought about him specifically in a long time, but the scar behind his ear was hers. Her suture pattern, her knot technique, her placement. She'd know it in a room full of identical scars. He retired 14 months ago, Cole said. He was watching the dog more than he was watching her. 8 years active, did 2 deployments, ran counter-narcotics support in 3 different theaters, came back intact, which is more than I can say for most of us. He's in excellent shape. I know. A pause. He earned it. The booster went in clean. Titan didn't flinch. Evelyn made notes on the chart and was composing her next sentence when the front window of the clinic ceased to exist. The sound was enormous. Not one window. All of them, simultaneously, both panes in the waiting room and the smaller one beside the front door, exploding inward in a single coordinated moment, as though something had struck each of them from outside with precise simultaneity. Then came the voices. 4 of them. Male. Moving fast through the destroyed front entrance, Marcus screamed something from the waiting room. A cage fell. An animal, one of the cats, she thought, shrieked at a frequency that cut through everything else. Evelyn was already moving before conscious thought had finished forming. She spun the wheelchair and got to the corridor entrance just as Marcus backed through it, hands up, face pale, a livid bruise already forming across his cheekbone from something that had hit him in the first seconds. Behind him came the first man. He was big, wearing a balaclava, holding a steel pipe with the casual familiarity of someone who'd done this before. He swept a tray of surgical instruments off the counter with one backhand swing that sent stainless steel clattering across the floor. "Tell me you've got a back exit," the man said. Not to Marcus. To Evelyn. She said nothing. "I'm going to take that as a no." He looked at her without expression, taking in the wheelchair, the clinic, the general smallness of the space. Whatever calculation he was running, it concluded quickly. "Then we'll be done fast. Where are the files?" "I have a lot of files," Evelyn said. "You're going to have to be specific." He swung the pipe sideways and cracked it against the corner of the front counter. The impact was like a gunshot in the enclosed space. "Don't be clever," he said. In the exam corridor behind her, she heard a sound she recognized. It was the sound of a working dog shifting from rest into active mode. The specific tonal change in the panting, the weight redistribution across the platform. The difference between a relaxed animal and an animal that has just made a decision. Cole's voice, from somewhere behind and to her left, came quiet and even. "Hey!" The man with the pipe turned. Cole was standing in the corridor entrance, one hand still resting on the exam table. He looked almost bored. "Wrong building," Cole said. The man with the pipe looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he glanced at Titan, who had moved from the table to the floor with no sound at all, and was now standing 3 feet from Evelyn's left wheel, his entire body still, his amber eyes fixed on the man with the pipe, with the focused precision of an animal that has been trained to understand exactly what comes next. "Walk away," the man said. Cole didn't answer. He just looked at the man the way someone looks at a problem they've already solved. Behind the counter, Evelyn reached for her phone and found the cord cut. The landline was dead. She reached for the drawer where she kept her cell, and her fingers closed on empty space. Someone had planned this. The third man came through from the waiting room then, pulling Marcus by the collar, and behind him came a fourth, smaller than the others, moving differently. And in his hand was a printed page that Evelyn recognized immediately because she had compiled it and organized it and delivered it herself. Her report. Her entire file on the trafficking ring. He held it up for her to see and smiled with the half of his face not covered by the balaclava. "You made this very easy for us," he said, "keeping a copy here." Evelyn looked at the file, at Marcus, who was bleeding from somewhere above his left ear. At the wrecked front of her clinic and the rain coming in through the empty window frames and the terrified sounds from the back ward, where animals that had come to her in pain were being frightened all over again. She looked at Ethan Cole. He was already looking at her. And Titan hadn't moved. He was still planted between her and the man with the pipe, low and utterly motionless, waiting for the word that all his training and all his years of service had been building toward. The smaller man with the file said, We're going to need you to sign something. A withdrawal. Your testimony, your complaint, all of it, gone. Or we come back. And next time we won't bother with windows." He unfolded a single sheet of paper and slid it across the counter toward her. Evelyn looked at it. Then she looked at the man who'd brought it. "No," she said. The man with the pipe raised it. The pipe came down fast. Cole moved faster. Not dramatically. There was nothing theatrical about it. He stepped into the swing rather than away from it, inside the arc where the steel had no leverage, and caught the man's wrist with both hands at the exact moment the pipe should have connected. The redirect was small and precise. The pipe hit the counter edge instead of Evelyn's shoulder, and the sound it made was a dull crack that vibrated through the entire frame of the reception desk. The man with the pipe hadn't expected resistance. That half-second of recalibration was enough. Cole put him into the counter face first, controlled, not brutal, more like a correction than an assault, and stepped back. The man slid to one knee, blinking, the pipe still in his hand but his grip uncertain now, his brain catching up to what his body had just experienced. "Stay down," Cole said. Same flat tone. Like he was talking to someone who'd tripped. The other three were already moving. The big one near Marcus dropped the tech's collar and came straight across the waiting room, knocking an empty chair sideways as he moved. Titan didn't wait for a command. He broke left on his own read, cutting the angle, and put himself between the charging man and Evelyn's position with a speed that looked almost liquid. 3 strides and a drop into a wide stance block, body low, not barking, just there, 75 pounds of trained muscle and intention creating a wall that the big man ran directly into at reduced speed, his momentum breaking apart against something he clearly hadn't anticipated being as solid as it was. The man stumbled sideways. Titan didn't pursue. He repositioned. Cole was already handling the second man set. The one who'd come in behind the first group, shorter and quicker, moving with more intelligence than the others. This one tried to go around rather than through, angling toward the corridor where Evelyn had retreated 2 feet back from the counter. Cole caught him by the jacket at the shoulder seam, used the man's own momentum to redirect him into the wall beside the door frame, and then held him there with one forearm across the upper back while he looked over his shoulder to assess the room. The fourth man, the one with the file, the one who'd slid the paper across the counter, hadn't moved from where he was standing. He watched Cole work, and his expression had changed. The casual confidence from 30 seconds ago was gone. What replaced it wasn't quite fear, it was calculation. "You're making a mistake," he said. Cole looked at him. "You broke into a medical clinic, assaulted the staff. You're giving me lectures. You don't know what you're walking into." "I know what I'm standing in." Cole released the man he'd been holding against the wall, stepped back, and kept both hands loose at his sides. "Walk out, all of you. Leave the file." The man with the pipe had gotten back to his feet. He was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow. Must have caught the counter edge. He looked at his own group. Silent communication, the kind that happens between people who've worked together long enough to not need words for it. Then the big one, the one who'd come at Titan, pulled something from inside his jacket. It wasn't a gun. It was a phone. He held it up, angled toward Evelyn. "Here's how this works," the man with the file said. He'd relaxed slightly, recentered, which meant this was the contingency, the backup play, the part they'd been prepared to use if the first approach didn't land. "We've got footage. Your clinic, your license, your name attached to some interesting animal acquisition records." Evelyn said, "Those records are fabricated." "That's what you say. That's not what they show." He tilted his head slightly. "You file the withdrawal. Everything goes away. Your license stays clean, your tech keeps his job, your clinic keeps its windows." He let that land for a moment. "Or you don't. And we make one call, and by tomorrow morning you're being investigated for running a front operation for the same trafficking network you claim to have reported. Evidence is already assembled. Chain of custody is clean." A small shrug. "We've done this before." Marcus, from where he was crouched near the overturned chair, said quietly, "Ev." She didn't look at him. She was looking at the phone the big man was holding, the footage on it. She couldn't see it clearly from across the room, but she could see enough. It was this clinic, interior, shot through the back window, she guessed, from the angle. She could see herself in the frame, moving through the supply corridor. They'd been watching for a while. "How long have you been filming?" she asked. "Long enough. Cole hadn't moved. He was standing slightly forward of Evelyn's position, not blocking her sightline, not crowding her. But she was aware of his exact location the way you're aware of a load-bearing wall. It was just there, and if it weren't there, the ceiling came down. "Dr. Carter," the man with the file said. He placed the withdrawal form back on the counter and smoothed it flat with one hand. Professional gesture, like he was closing a deal. "This is just business. Nobody needs to get hurt." "Marcus already got hurt," she said. "That was a misunderstanding." His face disagrees. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A slight tightening, a fraction of compression in the jaw. She'd irritated him. Not threatened him, not frightened him, just irritated him the way a small obstacle irritates someone on a schedule. "Sign the form," he said, "or I promise you, everything you've spent 3 years building in this room gets erased before the week is out. Your license, your reputation, and whatever this—" He gestured at the clinic generally, at the damage, at her, whatever this is supposed to be. Titan made a sound, not a growl, something lower and shorter, almost conversational. Cole said nothing. He was watching Evelyn. She looked at the form on the counter. The letterhead was a law firm she didn't recognize, out of county, clean-looking, the kind of stationery designed to project legitimacy. Below the firm's name was a single paragraph of dense legal language and a signature line. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put her hands on her wheels and rolled forward until she was directly in front of the counter, looking across it at the man with the file from a distance of maybe 4 feet. He hadn't expected her to move toward him. People in wheelchairs, in his experience, did not advance. "I know what you're protecting," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "I know the supply chain, I know the holding locations, and I know at least 2 of the acquisition points. I know which county records were altered, and by whom, and I know the name of the vet who's been signing fraudulent health certificates for transported animals." She paused. "That name is not in the report I gave to Detective Ruiz. I kept it back." The man's expression shifted. "So what you're telling me," she continued, "is that I should sign a form that eliminates the only leverage keeping me alive after this conversation." Silence. Rain hit the empty window frames. Something in the back ward knocked over a water bowl. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe," she said. "Sign off on that and find out." The man with the file took 2 seconds to make a decision, which was 2 seconds longer than the first time he'd spoken. And that gap told Evelyn something. He'd been sent here with a script. The script was failing. He needed to improvise, and improvising wasn't where he was most comfortable. He looked at the big man with the phone. Some message passed between them. Then he picked up the form and folded it, put it in his jacket. "We'll be in touch," he said. "I'm sure you will." He moved toward the door. The big man followed. The one Cole had redirected off the wall went next, moving quickly, not looking at Cole as he passed him. The one with the pipe, still bleeding from above the eyebrow, was last. He paused at the doorframe and looked back at Evelyn. "You're not as smart as you think," he said. She held his gaze. "Smarter than you needed me to be." He left. The clinic went quiet. Not genuinely quiet. There was still rain, still the sounds of distressed animals in the back, still the particular acoustic quality of a room with no windows. But the human noise stopped, and the pressure that had been filling the space for the last 12 minutes began to decompress. Marcus straightened up slowly from beside the overturned chair. He touched the side of his face, looked at his fingers, processed what he found there. "Okay," he said, to no one specifically. Cole stood in the corridor entrance. Titan came back to his left side and sat, breathing normally, like none of it had been particularly taxing. Evelyn turned her chair and looked at the room, at the destroyed windows, the instruments scattered across the floor, the corner of the counter where the pipe had cracked the laminate surface, the single intact surgical tray. Sitting undisturbed on a shelf 6 inches above where everything else had landed because the shelf was slightly higher than a man swinging a pipe in anger thought to look. "You need to call the police," Cole said. "I need to call a lot of people." She looked at the cut landline cord. "My cell's gone. They took it off the desk in the first 15 seconds. Cole reached into his jacket and produced a phone, setting it on the counter in front of her without ceremony. She picked it up, started to dial, then stopped. "Cole," she said. "Yeah." "The dog. Titan." She kept her eyes on the phone. Where did you get him? A beat of silence. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but she heard it. Military recovery program, he said. He'd been trafficked through a couple of private networks before authorities picked him up. Retrained with the teams out of Virginia. Spent 8 years before he came to me. Evelyn dialed. Let it ring. What year did they recover him? She asked. Another pause. Shorter this time. Why? She looked up at him. Cole was watching her with an expression that was hard to read. Not guarded exactly, but careful. Like someone who'd just noticed that a conversation had changed direction without him steering it. She held his gaze for 1 second, then looked back at the phone as the emergency dispatcher picked up. This is Dr. Evelyn Carter at Ash Grove Animal Care, 114 Millbrook Street, she said. I need to report an aggravated vandalism, assault, and extortion attempt. 4 male perpetrators, faces covered, last seen on foot heading south on Millbrook. She paused, listening, then, Yes. The clinic is secure. We have a witness. She glanced at Cole. Cole. 2, actually. She hung up. Cole was still watching her with that same careful look. She set the phone on the counter, rolled back slightly, and looked at Titan. The dog was watching her with an attention that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with something older and more direct. His ears were forward, his head was angled slightly, the way dogs angle their heads when they're working through a problem, and below his left ear the pale scar caught the harsh overhead light for just a moment. The program out of Virginia, she said. They would have had records on where he was before acquisition, his history, injuries, treatments, prior surgeries. Probably, Cole said. The scar behind his ear, she said. That's not a military medical scar, that's field suture work, performed with a 4 narrow monofilament and a curved reverse-cutting needle, which is not standard field kit unless whoever did it specifically preferred it. She met Cole's eyes. I specifically prefer it. The room was quiet for a long moment. Cole looked at the dog, then at Evelyn. How long ago? He said. 4 years? She cleared her throat. Before the accident. He was brought to me on the shoulder of Route 9, caught in a chain-link fence, left tibia, comminuted fracture. I stabilized him in the back of my van. A pause. I called him Bishop. Titan shifted. He turned his head fully toward Evelyn and pushed up off his sight. Not standing, something in between, a postural adjustment that took him several inches closer to her wheel. He made no sound. Cole looked at his dog for a long moment. He doesn't usually do that, he said. His voice had shifted slightly. Not softer, exactly, but less armored. No, she said. I imagine he doesn't. Marcus had been standing near the hall entrance through all of this, holding a wad of paper towels against the cut above his ear, and saying nothing. Now he said carefully, Are we going to talk about the fact that someone just tried to get us to help them run a trafficking cover-up, or are we— Both, Evelyn said. We're going to do both. She reached back under the counter and pulled out the folder she'd been reading that morning. Set it on the counter between herself and Cole. He looked at it without touching it. The name I kept back, she said. The vet signing the health certificates. I have documentation, billing records, cross-referenced animal IDs from 3 separate county databases. If the police investigate today's assault and they pull the footage from the vandalism, and I hand them this, she tapped the folder. In the right order, with the right explanation, it collapses the whole network. If, Cole said, if they take it seriously. She pulled the folder back, which they haven't the previous times. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? I need the police to actually look at the phone that man was holding, the footage of this clinic, because if it exists, the same device almost certainly has other material. That's not how people keep incriminating footage. Not in one clean folder with nothing else around it. Cole nodded slowly. So you need the phone. I need the police to get the phone, which means I need someone with the kind of background that makes a police report get taken seriously rather than filed and forgotten. She looked at him without apology. Which is apparently you. Something moved across Cole's face. Not quite amusement, not quite irritation. Something that lived in between those. I came in for a booster shot, he said. And Titan got it. She held his gaze. Billing will be the same regardless. The first police unit arrived 9 minutes after the call, which was slower than it should have been for an active assault report, but faster than Evelyn had pessimistically expected. Officer Dana Voss was mid-40s, efficient, with the look of someone who'd handled enough domestic calls and bar fights that the destroyed windows and scattered instruments registered as damage rather than seen. She walked the clinic methodically, recording on her body camera, asking questions in the brisk shorthand of someone compiling a report rather than investigating a crime. When Evelyn handed her the cut phone cord, Voss looked at it, bagged it, and wrote something down. When Evelyn described the withdrawal form, Voss stopped writing. "They brought a legal document," she said. "Pre-prepared. Letterhead from a firm called Harmon and Associates. I don't know the county." Voss looked at her. Then at Cole, who was standing near the exam corridor with Titan sitting at his heel and his arms crossed, and an expression that communicated nothing useful about what he was thinking. "You're the one who intervened?" Voss said. "I redirected one individual," Cole said. "The dog blocked a second. Nobody needed hospitalization." "ID?" Cole produced a card from his jacket. Voss looked at it, and her expression reorganized itself. "Prior service?" she said. 8 years, separated honorably. I'm not relevant. The phone is. One of the 4 men was holding a phone with footage of this clinic that predates today. If you locate the individuals on Millbrook heading south, that device is your best evidence. The footage was current. They'd been filming the interior through the back window on a standing basis. Voss looked at the card again, then at the bagged phone cord, then at the folder Evelyn had placed in front of her on the counter. "This is your previous report?" "Port," Voss said. "It's an expanded version. With documentation I didn't include the first time." "Why didn't you include it the first time?" Evelyn looked at her steadily. "Because the first time I didn't know how much I'd need it." Voss set down her pen. She looked at the clinic, at the gutted window frames letting rain air in across the floor, at Marcus sitting on a chair with a cold pack against his face, at the instruments that hadn't been picked up yet, at the 2 cat kennels that someone had shoved off a shelf and that were now upright again because Marcus had righted them almost immediately without being asked, because that was the kind of person he was. "I'm going to be straight with you, Dr. Carter," Voss said. "Extortion cases involving organized networks take time. This may not move fast." "I understand that." "You're going to need to be somewhere safe while we work it." "I'm not leaving my clinic." Voss studied her. Then she looked at Cole again, a longer look this time. Cole said nothing. Voss looked back at Evelyn. "You said there were 4 individuals," she said, "and the 2 of you and the tech were here. They left." "They left?" Evelyn confirmed. "Why did they leave?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Because I gave them a reason to think the situation was more complicated than they'd been briefed," she said. "And because," she glanced at Cole briefly, "the tactical math stopped working in their favor." Voss absorbed this. "I'll need full statements from all 3 of you," she said, "and I'd like to take that folder into evidence." "I have copies," Evelyn said. "Of course you do." Voss picked up her radio. "I'm going to call in a bolo on 4 males heading south on Millbrook. Do any of you have a description beyond the balaclavas?" Cole said, "The tall one on the right side of the group was favoring his left knee. Old injury or a fresh strain. Either way, his gait was off by about 15 degrees on the lateral plant. He's not running far." He paused. "The one with the pipe was about 5'10", heavy through the shoulders, bleeding from above the right eyebrow. Probably needs a stitch." Voss stared at him for a moment. Then she keyed the radio and started talking. By the time the second unit arrived and the statement process began in earnest, the rain had lightened to a steady drizzle. Marcus had found a box of garbage bags in the supply closet and was doing a rough job of covering the window openings, taping the black plastic to the frame edges with the clinical tape from the procedure drawer because it was the only tape they had. The animals in the back ward had settled. Not fully. Nothing about the morning had been settling. But the ambient anxiety had dropped below crisis level, and the rhythmic sound of the facility returning to something like its own normal had a calming effect that no amount of reassurance could have replicated. Evelyn sat at her counter and answered Voss's questions methodically, in the order they were asked, without editorializing. She described the men, the pipe, the form, the phone. She described what had been said, and in what sequence. She didn't describe her thoughts. She didn't describe what she'd felt when the man with the file had gestured at her clinic with that dismissive sweep of his hand, like the whole thing was a minor inconvenience on the way to his real agenda. She didn't describe the way her hands had stayed completely steady through all of it, which would have surprised people who thought they understood what fear looked like in a person who couldn't run. What she'd learned in the 4 years since the accident was that fear didn't look the way people expected it to. It didn't shake your hands or lock your throat. It settled somewhere lower and quieter than that, in the stomach and the specific tension just below the ribs. And it stayed there, and you worked around it, the same way you worked around a counter that was 2 inches too high or a door that needed an extra push. You mod adjustments. You stayed in the room. Cole had gone outside with the second officer to give his statement separately, Titan beside him in the thin rain, and Evelyn watched them through the plastic-covered window with a feeling she didn't try to name. The dog. 4 years and 3 surgeries and a criminal network and a military program and 14 months of retirement and an annual booster appointment, and he'd walked into this specific clinic on this specific morning and put his head on her lap like he was finishing a sentence that had been interrupted mid-word. She didn't know what to do with that yet. She filed it behind everything else that needed doing. There was a copy of the expanded case file in the fireproof box under the exam table. There was a second copy on a thumb drive in her bag. There was a third copy, the existence of which she'd told no one, in an encrypted folder on a server she'd set up with help from a former client who'd been a network security engineer before he retired. The man with the file had called her file a liability. What he hadn't considered was that she'd spent 3 months building it precisely because she'd expected them to come. She hadn't expected today. Not exactly, not the pipe and the windows and the pre-drafted withdrawal form. But she'd expected something, because people who report inconvenient truths to underfunded police departments in small towns tend to eventually receive a visit from the people those truths inconvenience. She'd just hoped to have more warning. Voss came back to the counter with her notepad and 2 more questions, and Evelyn answered them, and outside Cole and Titan were still talking to the second officer, and Marcus was cutting another length of garbage bag, and the drizzle kept coming. And somewhere on Millbrook, a man with a bleeding eyebrow was doing math about how badly today had gone wrong. In the back ward, one of the rescued terriers, a wire-haired little disaster named Pickwick, who'd come in with 3 broken ribs and a distrust of human hands, began barking. Not in distress, just barking. The way dogs bark when something has changed and they feel the need to acknowledge it. Evelyn turned her head toward the sound. And that was when the phone Cole had lent her, still sitting on the counter where she'd left it, began to ring. Unknown number. She looked at it, then at Voss, who had seen it too and was already reaching for her own radio. The phone rang 3 more times, then stopped. Then a text arrived. 1 line, no name. You kept something back. So did we. Voss took the phone without being asked. She held it by the edge, screen facing up, and read the message twice. Then she set it in an evidence bag from her kit, sealed it, labeled it, and placed it on the counter with a deliberateness that communicated she was now operating at a different level of attention than she had been 60 seconds ago. "Did you touch the screen?" she said. "No," Evelyn said. "I saw it arrive. Didn't open it." "Good." Voss keyed her radio. "This is Voss at the Millbrook scene. I need a supervisor and a digital evidence tech at my location. We have a post-incident contact from an unknown number on a victim-adjacent device." She released the key, looked at Evelyn. "Who else has this number?" "Nobody. It's his phone." She nodded toward the window where Cole was still visible outside with the second officer. "They either pulled it from the clinic's call log from when I called dispatch, which would mean they have access to the dispatch system, or they were already monitoring Cole's incoming and outgoing contacts." Voss said nothing, but the line of her jaw tightened. "Which means they identified him," Evelyn continued, "within the last 40 minutes, while 4 of their people were either being processed or running." "Or it means there are more than 4, Voss said. The room got quiet in a different way than it had before. Marcus stopped cutting the garbage bag. He didn't turn around. He just stopped. Outside, Cole had finished talking to the second officer and was walking back toward the clinic entrance. He looked at the bagged phone on the counter when he came through the door, then at Voss's expression, then at Evelyn. "What happened?" he said. "Someone texted your phone," Evelyn said. 1 line. "They know I withheld information from my original report." "How?" "Either they have someone inside the department, or they've been surveilling this clinic closely enough to have audio. Cole processed this in the way he processed most things, without visible reaction, just a brief stillness, while the information settled into whatever framework he was using. Then he looked at Voss. "You're going to want to sweep the clinic," he said. "Specifically the exam rooms and the reception counter area. If they've had a camera on the exterior, audio on the interior is the next logical step." Voss looked at him for a moment. "You have a background in signals intelligence?" "I have a background in not getting killed," Cole said. "Same skill set, different paperwork." Voss got on her radio again. The sweep took 40 minutes and was performed by a tech named Garza, who arrived in an unmarked county vehicle and moved through the clinic with an RF detector and a lens finder in systematic overlapping passes that Evelyn watched from behind the counter with her arms folded and her face carefully neutral. Garza found 2 devices. The first was behind the ventilation grate above the waiting room. A small wireless camera, no larger than a shirt button, adhered to the back of the grate cover with a strip of mounting putty. It had a viewing angle that covered the entire reception area, including the counter, the front door, and the seating against the wall. Based on the dust accumulation around the mounting putty, Garza estimated it had been in place for somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks. The second was in the exam room, smaller, audio only, stuck to the underside of the exam table with a magnetic backing that had been placed so precisely that it would have required someone lying flat on the floor to spot during a casual inspection. Evelyn looked at the exam table. She thought about every consultation she'd conducted in that room over the past 2 months. Every owner who'd sat in the chair across from her while she explained diagnoses or treatment plans, or the particular arithmetic of when intervention stops being mercy. Every conversation she'd had with Marcus about the case file, about the second call, about the name she'd kept back from the report. She thought about Titan on the exam table an hour ago, and the conversation she and Cole had begun while Garza's device was recording 12 inches below them. "They heard everything," she said. Garza looked at her. "Assuming it's been transmitting, yes." "It's been transmitting," she said. "That's why the text referenced what I kept back. They've had the information for weeks. The visit today wasn't to threaten me into silence." She looked at Voss, who had come into the exam room when Garza called her in. "It was to find out how much I had. The form was real. They would have taken a signature, but the real objective was to assess what I'd compiled." "And now they know," Voss said. "And now they know." Evelyn looked at the exam table. "Including the name." Voss crossed her arms. "The vet signing the false certificates. Dr. Philip Ransom, Millhaven County. He's been signing health and origin certificates for animals with fabricated ownership histories for at least 18 months. I have 14 confirmed transactions with his signature, cross-referenced against county intake records showing the same animals listed as strays or surrenders in their county of origin." She looked at Voss steadily. "That name has been in my head for 6 weeks. I haven't written it anywhere connected to a network or a device, and I just said it aloud in this room for the first time." The silence that followed had weight. Garza finished bagging the audio device and stood up. He looked at Voss without saying anything. Voss said, "We need to get you out of this building." "No," Evelyn said. "Dr. Carter, I'm not leaving the animals. We can arrange." "No." She said it without heat, without particular force, just as a complete sentence. "I've been treating animals in this building for 3 years, and I'm not leaving them in a clinic with garbage bags for windows because someone is trying to scare me into being somewhere I can be more easily isolated." She looked at Voss. "Which is what moving me accomplishes. If I'm here, in a building with police presence, with functioning cameras, now that yours are going to replace those 2, she gestured at the bagged devices, then I'm harder to reach than I am in a car or a temporary location." Voss studied her. "You've thought about this," she said. "I've been thinking about it for 3 months, Evelyn said. "Since the first call." Cole had positioned himself in the doorway of the exam room through this exchange, not participating, taking up space in the quiet way he seemed to occupy rooms generally, present without demanding acknowledgement. Now he said, "She's right about the isolation risk. Moving a principal without a secure destination is worse than holding position with controlled access." Voss looked at him with the expression of someone who was rapidly revising the original nature of the situation they'd responded to. "Are you planning to stay?" she said. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at him. She didn't ask. She didn't make it easy. He said, I don't have anything scheduled this afternoon. By noon, Ash Grove Animal Care had 2 uniformed officers stationed outside, a temporary camera array that Garza had rigged to a county-issued monitor set up on Evelyn's front counter, and no working windows. Marcus had finished covering the openings and had gone to the back ward to begin the interrupted morning routine, working his way through feeding and checks with the methodical focus of someone who needed to be useful more than he needed to process what had happened. Evelyn led him. She understood the impulse. She was at the counter going through the case file again, the physical copy from the lockbox. When Cole came and sat on the edge of the low waiting room bench nearest the counter, Titan arranged himself on the floor between them. Ransom, Cole said. You know anything about him outside the paperwork? Millhaven County is small. He's been practicing there for over 20 years. Family practice, livestock and companion animals. He's got a clean record with the state board and a good reputation with the farming community. She turned a page. Which is exactly the kind of cover you'd want if you were processing livestock origin paperwork for animals that never went near a farm. So he's either running it or he's being coerced. I think he's being paid, Evelyn said. The transactions are too consistent for coercion. Coerced people make mistakes, slow down, have gaps. His signature appears on a very regular schedule. No gaps, no anomalies, no periods where the frequency drops. That's someone comfortable with the arrangement. Cole was quiet for a moment. What made you hold his name back? She looked up from the file. Because I've handed things to Detective Ruiz before, she said. And they went somewhere I couldn't follow. I kept Ransom back so that if the file disappeared or got mishandled, there was still a piece they didn't have. And if they came for you before you could use it, then someone would eventually find it. She held his gaze. The encrypted folder. The person who helped me set it up has instructions to release it to 3 journalists and the state veterinary board simultaneously if he doesn't hear from me on a specific schedule. Cole looked at her for a long moment. You've been running a dead man's switch, he said. I've been protecting the information, she said. It's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. She didn't argue. Titan put his head on her left wheel. Not her lap, the wheel, which was what was available from his position on the floor. It was such a specific gesture, so clearly calibrated to what was reachable, that she had to look away for a moment. He used to do that when I was working, she said, when I was treating him. If I got quiet for too long, he'd find whatever part of me he could reach and just be there. Cole looked at the dog. He still does that. Usually it's my boot. Means he's worried. I know what it means. She looked at Cole. He was looking at Titan with an expression she recognized. Not sentiment exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone who has organized a significant portion of their interior life around a relationship they wouldn't know how to describe to someone who hadn't had it. How long have you had him? She asked. 14 months. He was assigned to my unit for 3 years before that, so we knew each other. He paused. When he retired, it made sense. Who was with him before your unit? Handler named Carver, KIA in his second deployment. Cole said it evenly, but the evenness itself communicated something. Titan finished the deployment with a temporary handler and then came back and was reassigned. He had some adjustment issues after Carver. Took about 6 months before he was fully operational again. Evelyn was quiet. Dogs grieve, she said. I know. Most people don't actually know that. They say it, but they... I know, he said again, softer. The monitor on the counter showed 4 camera feeds, the clinic exterior, the alley behind the building, the parking lot, and the corridor leading to the back ward. All quiet. The rain had stopped at some point without either of them noticing. Detective Ruiz arrived at 1:15. He was younger than his title suggested, mid-30s, neat, with the perpetually slightly apologetic expression of a man operating in an underfunded department and aware of it. He walked through the clinic, looked at the covered windows and the monitor array and Voss's evidence bags lined up on the far counter, and then looked at Evelyn with an expression that she read, correctly, as complicated. Dr. Carter, he said, detective. You should have called me directly this morning. My phone was taken in the first 30 seconds. And the last time I brought you something significant, it sat in a file drawer for 11 days before anyone looked at it. Ruiz absorbed this. He didn't argue. I've got the bolo out, he said. The man with the eye injury was picked up 40 minutes ago at the urgent care on Fenwick. Walked in for sutures and the intake nurse flagged the description. He's not talking, but he's in custody. He set his own folder on the counter and opened it. The phone that was recovered from Cole's lender number. The text came from a burner, purchased with cash at a gas station on Route 44 11 days ago. We won't trace it back, but the timing, 11 days ago, Evelyn said. Yeah. That's 2 days after I told you about the second call. She looked at him. Which means someone in the loop of that conversation moved within 48 hours. The room got very still. Ruiz looked at his folder, then at Voss, who was across the room and had turned around when Evelyn said it. I told 3 people about the second call, Ruiz said carefully. My sergeant, the duty officer that day, and the clerk who logged the report. I'm not accusing anyone, Evelyn said. I'm telling you the timeline. Ruiz closed his folder. He picked it back up. He set it down again. Show me the full file, he said. Well, it took 2 hours. Evelyn walked him through it in order. The original report, the follow-up documentation, the animal ID cross-references, the billing record she'd obtained through connections at 2 county shelters who trusted her, the health certificate signatures, and finally the compiled evidence connecting Dr. Philip Ransom's practice to 14 confirmed fraudulent origin documents. She also showed him, for the first time, the 3 photographs she'd taken of the holding facility. She had not told anyone about the photographs. They existed because 8 weeks ago, a farmer named Gerald Odom had brought her a dog with a severed dew claw and an infected shoulder wound, presenting it as a stray he'd found near his fence line. The dog had a microchip that Odom didn't know about because whoever had removed the chip had missed the secondary one, a backup chip that some breeders applied between the shoulder blades rather than the standard neck location. Evelyn had scanned the secondary chip, run the number quietly through a national registry, and found the registered owner, a family in Portland, Oregon, who had reported their Belgian Malinois missing 2 years earlier. She'd treated the dog, sent Odom home without telling him what she'd found, and then driven to the address associated with Odom's property records the following Sunday morning. She'd gone alone, which was not a good decision, and she knew it wasn't a good decision while she was doing it, but she'd gone anyway because she needed to see. She'd found 12 dogs in a barn on an adjacent property that Odom owned under a secondary LLC. Clean water, adequate food, not actively abused, but crated in transit kennels, each wearing a new color tag without a chip, each with the same microscarring pattern at the neck that she'd been seeing in her clinic records for months. She'd taken 3 photographs through the barn door with her phone before the sound of a truck on the property road made her leave quickly. She'd never told Ruiz about the photographs because she'd obtained them by entering a property without authorization, and she'd been uncertain whether showing them would contaminate the investigation or give Ruiz a reason to bury the file over procedural concerns. She showed them to him now because she was done being careful in ways that only benefited the people she was trying to stop. Ruiz looked at the photographs for a long time. This is the Odom property on Cassidy Road, he said. The eastern parcel. It's listed to an LLC called Greenfield Holdings. If you pull the corporate registry, Greenfield Holdings has 2 other listed directors besides Odom. Who? One is a logistics company owner out of the city. The other, she said, is the man who came in this morning with the withdrawal form. Ruiz looked up from the photographs. Cole, from the bench near the counter, said nothing. He'd been sitting there through the entire 2-hour presentation without interjecting, and he didn't inject now, but the silence he offered felt like something structural, like a frame that let the rest stand upright. What's his name? Ruiz said. His face was covered, Evelyn said. But the LLC filing is public record. The second director is listed as Martin Cheel. I don't have a physical description that could confirm him as today's individual, but the corporate connection to Odom and the Cassidy Road property is enough for a warrant, Ruiz said. He was already reaching for his phone. Wow. What happened next moved faster than Evelyn had expected and slower than she needed it to. Ruiz made 3 calls in rapid succession, stepping outside for 2 of them. Voss coordinated with the custody situation on the injured man at urgent care. Garza finished his sweep documentation and submitted his evidence chain report electronically from the parking lot. The clinic was fully mapped as a crime scene now. Photographs, measurements, the 2 recovered devices logged and serial numbered. And Evelyn had been told formally not to clean up or move anything until she received clearance, which she agreed to and then immediately regretted because the disorder of the damaged space was starting to press on her in ways she couldn't entirely suppress. She went to the back ward. The animals were calm now, or as calm as they were going to get. Pickwick the terrier was asleep on his side, which was the first time Evelyn had seen him sleep without curling into a defensive ball, and she stayed next to his kennel for longer than she had time for. The rescue kittens had been fed. The retriever with the paw wound had his dressing changed and was eating with the focused dedication of a dog who had decided that food, at least, was reliable. She did her rounds slowly and let the work settle her the way it always had. The specific gravity of being needed by things that couldn't ask for what they needed. It was a strange occupation for a person with a complicated relationship to helplessness. She'd spent years thinking about that. When she came back out to the front, Cole was at the counter with the county monitor showing the camera feeds and a paper cup of coffee that Marcus must have made at some point. "Ruiz get the warrant?" she said. "Working on it. You met a call to the DA's office. Said it could be tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on which judge is available." "Tonight or tomorrow?" She settled behind her end of the counter. "And ransom?" "Ruiz is treating it as a concurrent track. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Office has been notified, but they're not moving until the warrant clears." She nodded, put her hands flat on the counter. "They're going to move the animals," she said. Cole looked at her. "At the Cassidy Road barn. If Cheel is connected to the LLC and Cheel is also this morning's withdrawal form person, then Cheel knows he's been identified. Not by name, maybe, but he knows I have the corporate structure." She looked at the monitor. "They'll move the dogs tonight, or they already have. Or they already have." She pressed her palms flat. "Which means the warrant needs to move now." "Ruiz knows that." "Does he?" Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee and took a drink and set it back down and said, "You want me to go out there and tell a detective how to do his job? I want someone to make sure the urgency of the timeline is fully communicated. He's a professional. He has a leak in his department and a case that's been sitting in a drawer for 3 months. I have some reservations about the pace." Cole looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, not even close to one, but the shadow of a thing that had lived near smiles once. "I'll talk to him," he said. He stood up, scratched Titan briefly behind the ear, and went out through the front entrance. Evelyn looked at the monitor. 4 feeds, all static, the alley behind the building empty and gray and striped with puddles from the morning's rain. And then the feed from the back alley moved. Not the image. The image was fine. But something in the alley moved, a shadow at the far right edge of the frame, where the camera's viewing angle met the corner of the adjacent building. She watched it for 3 seconds. The shadow stayed. She picked up the desk phone, the replacement handset Voss had brought in, plugged into the clinic's secondary line, and dialed Cole's cell. He picked up immediately. "What?" "Back alley, camera feed, far right corner. Someone's been standing there for at least 30 seconds and hasn't moved." A brief silence. "How many feet from the back entrance?" he said. She calculated from memory. "Maybe 60. The door opens outward and left. If someone came in fast from that corner, they'd have about 4 seconds before they were inside." "Where's Marcus?" "Back ward." "Get him to the front, lock the back door if it isn't already, and stay on the phone." She was already moving toward the back ward. "Cole, there are 2 officers out front." "I know, I'm talking to Ruiz now. Stay on the phone." She found Marcus rewrapping a supply shelf and said quietly, "I need you up front, now. Don't ask." Marcus read something in her face and put down the bandaging roll without a word. She sent him ahead and went to the back door. Steel frame, heavy, with a deadbolt that she could reach from her chair. She turned the bolt and heard it engage and put her hand flat against the door as if she could feel through it. Nothing. Solid. She went back to the front. Marcus was at the counter looking at the monitor. The shadow at the corner of the alley feed was still there. "What is that?" Marcus said. "I don't know yet." Cole came back through the front entrance 40 seconds later. Ruiz was 2 steps behind him. Voss was on the radio. "Officers are going around the side," Cole said. "Don't move from this position." He stopped at the counter, looked at the monitor, looked at the corner. "It moved," Marcus said. They all looked. The shadow was gone. And then the back door, which Evelyn had deadbolted 40 seconds ago, made a sound. Not a knock, not a forced entry. A sound like something testing the frame, A single controlled lateral pressure that made the door flex almost imperceptibly in its housing without making a loud noise, and then stopped, like someone confirming information rather than attempting entry. A sound like someone with a key realizing there was a bolt. The three of them in the front room didn't speak. Titan, who had been lying on the floor beside the monitor stand, stood up. His head came up slowly, ears rotated fully forward, body orientated toward the back corridor, with the precise locked-in attention of an animal whose entire nervous system has come to full alert. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stood there, reading the air, telling them in the only language he had that whatever was on the other side of that door was not done with them. Cole's hand went to the back of his waistband. Ruiz was already on his radio, and Evelyn looked at the back door, and at Titan, and at the two cameras that covered the alley showing nothing now. The corner empty, the alley empty, the gray afternoon empty, and understood with cold clarity that whoever was out there had known exactly where the cameras were pointed and had moved specifically to step outside their range. "They've done reconnaissance," she said. Cole looked at her. "The audio device in the exam room," she said. "They've been in this clinic recently. Not just to install the device, to map it. They know the layout. They know the back door location. They know which windows are covered and which aren't." She looked at the covered window openings, the garbage bag plastic moving slightly in the draft. They know there are openings. The realization moved through the room. Ruiz said something sharp into his radio. Cole said, "Marcus, get down behind the counter and stay there." Marcus didn't argue. And then, from somewhere outside the building, not at the back door, not at the front, but from the direction of the alley wall that ran along the eastern side of the clinic, maybe 15 feet from where Evelyn was sitting, there came a sound that was not weather and not the building settling. It was the sound of something being positioned, metal on concrete. The careful placement of something being set up deliberately and without rushing, the way a person sounds when they are not trying to be fast, but trying to be precise. Evelyn rolled 2 feet to her right, away from the eastern wall. Cole took 3 steps to his left and put himself between her and the wall. Titan moved with him. Ruiz stepped backward into the corridor, still on the radio, his voice low and very fast. The sound from the eastern wall stopped, and for the next 11 seconds, the clinic was absolutely silent. No animals, no rain, no traffic from Millbrook, nothing, as though the whole building was holding its breath along with the people inside it. Then the back door came open. Not kicked, not forced. Opened cleanly with a key, the deadbolt throwing back with a mechanical snap that meant the bolt had been defeated somehow, retracted from the outside with a technique that should not have been possible from the wrong side of a commercial deadbolt. The door swung inward. Nobody was there. A phone slid across the back corridor floor, spinning on the tile until it came to rest against the baseboard with its screen facing up and active, displaying a single live video feed showing what was clearly the interior of a barn. 12 dog kennels, all empty. And sitting on the floor of the barn, in front of the row of empty kennels, was a piece of paper. The camera wasn't close enough to read it, but Evelyn could see the letterhead, the same letterhead as the withdrawal form, and below the letterhead, a single line of handwritten text, large enough to read even on the small screen. "Next time, we won't ask." Cole picked up the phone without touching the screen. Ruiz came to look at it. Evelyn looked at it. Then she looked up, past the open back door, at the empty alley and the gray afternoon light, and the absence where 12 dogs had been, and something shifted in her that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the specific quality of anger that accumulates in a person who has been patient for a very long time and has now found the edge of it. "They moved them tonight," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Before the warrant. They knew we were getting the warrant." She looked at Ruiz. "Someone told them." Ruiz held her gaze. He looked like a man processing the collapse of something he'd been telling himself was structurally sound. Ransom, Cole said. "What about him?" Ruiz said. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the phone in Cole's hand. "If someone in your department tipped them," she said, "and Cheel moved the dogs because of it, then Ransom is the one who arranged the transport. He has the certification capability. He can produce the papers for a mass movement of animals overnight." She looked at Ruiz. "You need to get to Ransom before whoever they just called does." Ruiz picked up his radio. He keyed it, and the first word he said was a name that wasn't Ransom, wasn't Cheel, wasn't Odom. A name that Evelyn didn't recognize. But the way Voss's head came up from across the room when she heard it told Evelyn that Voss recognized it. And from the change in Ruiz's face, the thing that moved behind his eyes, like a man stepping off a surface he'd trusted and finding nothing under his foot, Evelyn understood that the name he'd just said was someone inside the department, someone close. Titan stepped forward. He moved to the open back door and stood in it, facing the alley, his outline framed against the gray light like something carved rather than born. And he scanned the empty space beyond with a focus so complete and so still that even Ruiz stopped talking for a moment. The alley was empty, but Titan stayed in the door. Because sometimes an animal knows something is not finished before any human in the room has caught up to it, and this was not finished. The name Ruiz had said was Callow, Sergeant Dale Callow, 14 years on the Ashgrove PD. The duty officer who had been present when Evelyn reported the second call 3 months ago, and who had logged the complaint in the system with a notation that read, "Low priority, no actionable threat," before the ink was dry. Voss knew the name because Callow was her direct supervisor. She stood very still for about 4 seconds after Ruiz said it. Then she put her radio down on the counter with careful precision, like she was setting down something that had become unexpectedly heavy, and she said, "What did you find?" "The warrant request went through the duty log," Ruiz said. He wasn't looking at Voss. He was looking at the wall above the counter, at the middle distance, working through something internally that hadn't fully resolved. "Callow was on the desk when I called in the DA request. 40 minutes later, the dogs are gone, and we've got a phone on our floor." "That's circumstantial," Voss said. "His personal vehicle was ticketed on Route 44 11 days ago," Ruiz said. "Same block as the gas station where the burner was purchased." The room was quiet. "That's still," Voss started. "I know what it is," Ruiz said. He looked at her now. "I know what it is, Dana." She absorbed it. Her face went through something complicated and then settled into something flat and professional and probably very hard to maintain. "Okay," she said. That was all. Ruiz stepped outside to make the call that needed to be made, and Evelyn listened to his footsteps cross the parking lot and stop. And she looked at Voss, who was standing at the counter with her arms at her sides and her eyes focused on nothing specific. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. Voss looked at her. "Why are you apologizing?" "I'm not. I'm just—" Evelyn stopped. "I know it's worse when it's someone you know." Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, "Callow always thought your reports were overstated. Said it at the staff meeting when your second submission came in. Said you were I'm going to paraphrase, an overinvested civilian who didn't understand how investigations worked and was building a conspiracy theory out of routine animal control failures." She paused. "I didn't argue with him. Because he was your supervisor. Because I wasn't sure he was wrong." She picked up her radio again and turned it in her hands without keying it. "He may not have known what he was feeding them. He may have mentioned the warrant timing without understanding what it would be used for." "That's possible," Evelyn said. "But you don't think so?" Evelyn looked at the phone on the corridor floor, the one that had slid in through the opened back door, its screen now dark. The devices in this clinic were installed professionally. Whoever placed them knew where not to be seen. That's not luck. That's information. And the only people with detailed knowledge of my complaint timeline were the people I'd spoken to inside that department. Voss set the radio down again. "I'll give a statement," she said. "Whatever they need." "I know you will." Cole came back through the front entrance. He'd been outside with the 2 uniformed officers who'd gone around the building when the shadow appeared in the alley feed. He looked at the room, took in the altered atmosphere, and came to the counter. "They found a cut," he said, "in the fence line at the back corner of the property, eastern side. Recent. Wire still has the bright cut edge. Someone has been moving through there on a regular basis without going past the front cameras." He looked at Evelyn. "That's how they installed the devices. They weren't ever inside through the front door. They came through the back," she said, "through the neighboring property. The dry cleaner shares a fence line with the alley. Garza is going to want to check their exterior for additional surveillance. The dry cleaner closes at 6. Someone was there after hours." She thought about it. "Weeks ago, maybe longer," Marcus said, from where he'd stayed behind the counter. "Can I stand up now?" "Yes," Evelyn said. He stood up slowly and looked at all of them. "Is anyone going to tell me what's actually happening? Because from where I'm sitting, we've had 4 guys trash the clinic. Someone's been watching us for months. The police have a dirty sergeant, and we have a video of an empty barn." He paused. "Did I miss anything?" "The dogs from the barn are in transit," Evelyn said. "Somewhere. And until we know where, we can't recover them, and the people who moved them are going to use the time to sanitize their operation." "So what do we do?" Evelyn looked at the dark screen of the phone on the floor. "We find out where they moved them," she said. The man in custody at Ash Grove Urgent Care was named Troy Mercer. He had a 2-inch laceration above his right eyebrow that required 6 stitches, a prior conviction for aggravated assault in a different county, and the specific disposition of a person who had been in police custody before and understood that silence was his best available tool. He exercised it thoroughly. The detective who conducted his initial interview, a woman named Paulson from the County Criminal Investigations Unit, who had been called in specifically because of the internal affairs component, reported that Mercer had said exactly 4 words during the 40-minute session. "I want a lawyer." What Mercer did not know, because he'd had no way of knowing, was that the phone recovered from his jacket pocket during processing was not the phone that had been in his hand in the clinic. That phone, the one with the footage of the clinic interior, the one Evelyn had seen him holding when the man with the file made his presentation, had apparently been passed or dropped during the incident and had not been on his person when officers apprehended him at urgent care. What was on his phone was a series of text messages to a contact saved as M that included, in the 12 messages exchanged over the previous 72 hours, the phrase "the vet's been building something," C says handle it before Thursday. C. Paulson had called Ruiz about the messages from outside the urgent care building, and Ruiz had driven directly to the Ash Grove PD and walked into his sergeant's office and closed the door. Evelyn knew none of this in real time. She pieced it together over the following hours through the controlled information flow of Ruiz checking in with her every 40 minutes. Not because he was legally required to, but because, she suspected, he'd done the math on how much the investigation owed to her and had decided that the ledger obligated him to it. The 4th call came at 6:47 in the evening. "Callow is suspended pending investigation," Ruiz said. He sounded tired in a specific way. Not physically tired, but the tired that comes from having spent a day revising your understanding of people you thought you knew. "We're treating the text messages as probable cause for a material connection, not a confirmed conspiracy. His lawyer is already here." "What about Cheel?" "Martin Cheel was picked up 2 hours ago at his registered address. He's lawyered up, but he was there, didn't run, which is either confidence or stupidity. The DA is processing." A pause. "His lawyer is also already there." "And Ransom?" A longer pause. "Millhaven County went to his practice at 5:30, Ruiz said. "He was gone. Office staff said he left at noon and hasn't been back. His home address is empty. Car's gone." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. "He ran," she said. "Looks like." "Because someone told him to." "We don't know that yet." "Ruiz." "We don't know it yet," he repeated with slightly more emphasis. "What we know is he's missing, and we have a bolo on his vehicle. He hasn't crossed any of the state lines we're watching. He's somewhere." "He's somewhere with the documentation for 12 animals in transit," she said. "Without his paperwork, those animals are moving without certification, which means whoever is transporting them is carrying risk. Which means they'll either dump the animals or accelerate delivery." "Accelerate delivery to where?" She opened her eyes. "That's the question I can't answer from here." She could hear him thinking. "The LLC filings," he said finally. "Greenfield Holdings. The 2 directors are Odom and Cheel, but the registered agent is a company called Northfield Administrative Services. We're pulling their client list. If they're the administrative layer, they may have the shipping destinations in their records." "May." "It's what you have," she said. "Yeah." A pause. "Dr. Carter, you should sleep. We'll call you if something moves." "I won't sleep." "I know," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." He hung up. Marcus left at 8. Evelyn told him to go, and he didn't argue too hard, which told her the adrenaline had been metabolizing out of him for the past hour. And what was replacing it was a bone-level exhaustion that wouldn't be argued with. He stood at the door for a moment and looked at the covered windows and the monitor array and Titan asleep on the floor near the counter. "You want me back tomorrow?" he said. 7:30, she said. We have 2 afternoon surgeries and the kitten litter needs their 2-week waits. He nodded like this was completely normal. Then he left. Voss had been replaced by a night officer named Huang, who was stationed outside and checked in with Evelyn by radio every 30 minutes. The monitor on the counter showed 4 quiet feeds. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and wet garbage bag plastic, and the faint animal warmth from the back ward. Cole was still there. He'd made no announcement about staying. He simply hadn't left. At some point around 7, he'd retrieved a duffel from his truck, which had been sitting in the lot since morning, and placed it near the bench without comment. He'd also, at some point, located the clinic's small break room, found the coffee maker, and produced 2 cups, placing one on the counter in front of Evelyn without being asked. She'd drunk it without thanking him, which he seemed to understand was its own form of acknowledgement. They had worked in the same space for hours with the particular compatibility of 2 people who didn't require conversation to coexist. It reminded her of something she'd had once, briefly, before the accident, with a colleague who'd understood that silence wasn't absence, it was just silence. At 9:15, Cole said, "You should eat something. There's nothing here. I saw crackers in the break room. Those are for client waiting room anxiety. You qualify." She looked at him. He had the same flat, unperforming expression he'd had all day, and she'd been watching it long enough now to distinguish the subdivisions of it. The slight difference between when he was processing information and when he was waiting for someone else to catch up, and when he was being deliberately unrevealing, and when he was just quiet because he was a quiet person. Right now he was being careful. "What?" she said. "Nothing." "Cole." He looked at his coffee cup. "You took photographs of a property you weren't authorized to access. You built a dead man's switch around information that law enforcement should have had from the beginning. You withheld a material witness identity from a formal complaint for 6 weeks. He looked up. You did all of that while running a medical practice and fielding threatening calls and not telling anyone. Is there a question in there? Not really. He paused. I'm just noting that you've been carrying all of that alone. She looked at the monitor feeds for a moment. Someone had to, she said. Yeah. He was quiet. That's what people say when they've been doing something alone for so long they've forgotten what it feels like to not. She didn't answer. Titan shifted on the floor, resettling, his side rising and falling in the slow rhythm of genuine sleep. He trusted you immediately, Cole said. This morning, the second you were near him. I told you, dogs remember differently. I know what you told me. He looked at the dog. He's not easy with people. Never has been, even before Carver. He runs hot in new situations, and he takes time to settle. He's good at his job because he's trained past it, but underneath that he's not easy. He looked at her. You were different. From the first 30 seconds. She felt something she didn't try to name, somewhere behind the sternum. He was in a lot of pain when I found him, she said. Animals in severe pain either shut down completely or they fight everything that touches them. He did neither. He was present. Even through the surgery, even through the worst of the recovery. He stayed present. She looked at the dog. I think I liked him before I'd done anything to help him. That doesn't happen very often. Cole was quiet for a moment. What happened to the other animals you were treating at the time? The van operation. Shut down after the accident. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks, then rehabilitation, then the process of restructuring. She said the word without any weight on it, which meant it had a lot of weight on it, and she'd made a decision not to carry it in public. By the time I could work again, the van was gone. I built this instead. Better, he said. Smaller. Better, he repeated. Not a compliment. A statement of fact, delivered the way he delivered most things. She looked at him. He was looking at the counter, at the cracked laminate where the pipe had hit, at the repair she'd need to schedule. Why are you still here? She said. He looked up. You have what you came for, she said. Titan's booster is done. The police are handling the case. Voss is being replaced with Huang. There's no tactical reason for you to still be in this building. He held her gaze. No, he said. There isn't. She waited. He didn't explain further. He picked up his coffee, found it was empty, and set it back down. I'll take the early watch, he said. You should try to sleep. I know you're not going to sleep, he said. Try anyway. She didn't sleep. She sat in the back ward on the rolling stool she kept for long procedures, with the lights dimmed and Pickwick's kennel open just enough that the terrier could see her if he woke up, and she went through the full case file in her memory, the way she went through a surgical procedure, in order, without skipping, without assuming she already knew the next step. 12 dogs in a barn. Empty now. Gerald Odoms LLC, Cheel's name on the paperwork. Ransom's certifications providing the paper trail that made the transport appear legitimate. She'd identified 14 transactions, but 14 was the number she could document. The actual volume could be significantly higher. Those were only the animals that had come through her clinic specifically, or the clinics of colleagues who'd shared records with her when she asked. She thought about the Belgian Malinois, the family in Portland who'd lost him 2 years ago. She thought about Bishop, about Titan, about the chain-link fence on Route 9 and the headlamp and the borrowed surgical kit and the 18 months of dog who'd become 4 years of absence and then somehow became this morning, this specific unlikely morning, walking in through a door with a man in dark jacket and a look that said, "I remember you." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. At 11:40, her radio crackled with Huang's check-in. She answered it. All quiet outside. At 12:15, Cole appeared in the doorway of the back ward. He looked at her, assessed the situation, and came in without saying anything. He sat on the low stool near the medication cabinet and looked at the kennels. "Pickwick," she said, nodding toward the terrier. "Who named him?" "I did." "Why Pickwick?" "He arrived in a cardboard box," she said. "The box had a Dickens novel in it. Someone had been using the book as bedding." Cole looked at the terrier. "That's not a bad story." "Most of them have a story." She looked at the row of kennels. "That's the part that doesn't go away. The context for how they ended up here. You learn not to dwell on it because it doesn't help the treatment, but you know, you always know." Cole was quiet. "The 12 in the barn," she said. "Some of them have a story like that. A family somewhere, someone who looked and couldn't find them." He nodded. "We'll find them," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but it's still true." She looked at him. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "Most things that are true don't make immediate sense," he said. "They just turn out to be." She didn't have an answer for that. She didn't try to find one. Ruiz called at 2:17 in the morning. His voice had the particular quality of someone who hasn't slept and has stopped expecting to. "Northfield Administrative Services," he said. "Their client list has 11 active accounts. One of them is a transport logistics company called Blue Ridge Animal Relocation. We've been looking at their records for the past 4 hours." He paused. "They have a delivery scheduled for 6 tomorrow morning. Commercial kennel facility outside of Renfield. That's about 90 minutes north. The manifest was filed yesterday, which means it was filed before this morning." "They scheduled the transport before the visit," Evelyn said. Cole had come from the back ward doorway when the phone rang and was standing near her, close enough to hear the call without it being on speaker. "Today was never about getting me to sign the withdrawal. Today was about buying 48 hours. "The visit bought them the time to complete a transport they'd already arranged," Ruiz said. "We didn't get the warrant for the Cassidy Road property until 4 hours after they'd already cleared it. The warrant timing was compromised." "Yes." "Flat." "Paulson is on Callow's financials now. We'll know more by morning." A pause. "The Renfield facility. We have county sheriffs standing by. They're waiting on authorization. DA is awake and working it." Another pause. "The animals may still be there, Evelyn." She hadn't heard him use her first name before. "What do you need from me?" she said. "The manifest lists 14 animals in transit. You have documentation on 12. Can you give me physical identifiers, descriptions, markings, the secondary chip number on the Malinois, anything that can be used to confirm identity on scene?" "Yes. Give me 20 minutes." She was already rolling toward the counter where her files were. "I'll need it in writing," Ruiz said. "Emailed to the county DA's office. We're using it to supplement the warrant language." "I don't have working internet. The router is on the eastern wall." Cole said, "My phone has a hotspot." She looked at him. He had his phone out already. She took it. The document took 31 minutes, not 20. She pulled physical descriptors from memory and cross-referenced them against her written records, producing a table of 12 animals with species, breed, approximate age, distinguishing physical characteristics, and for 6 of the animals, enough detail to constitute a veterinary identification record that would hold in a courtroom. For the Belgian Malinois, She included the secondary chip number, the name registered with the national database, and a note that the registered owner had been notified by her personally 6 weeks ago and had provided a written statement confirming ownership. She'd obtained that statement because she'd thought she might need it, and she'd been right about needing it, even if she hadn't been right about when. She sent the document from Cole's phone at 2:51 in the morning. Ruiz acknowledged receipt at 2:53. At 4:40, he called again. "Renfield," he said. "They're there." She put her hand flat on the counter. "All of them?" she said. 14 animals in transit kennels and a commercial van in the facility's loading bay. The driver is in custody. The facility owner is claiming he didn't know the origin of the animals. We'll deal with that separately. A pause, and his voice shifted slightly. "Evelyn, the Malinois, the one from Portland. She's there." She. Evelyn hadn't known the dog's sex. The chip registration had just given her the number and the owner's name. She'd been thinking of the dog as the Malinois for 6 weeks, a data point in a case file, and now the dog was a she, and she was in a loading bay in Renfield at 4:40 in the morning in a transit kennel, and she was there. "The owner's been notified?" she said. Her voice came out steady. "The Portland family?" "Not yet. We'll do that in the morning." He cleared his throat. "All 14 are in custody. Animals will be transported to a county shelter pending identification and returned to owners. I'd like you to be available for identification assessment when that happens." "I'll be there." "I know you will." A pause. "Ransom is still in the wind. Cheel's talking to his lawyer. We'll get to them." Another pause, longer. "You did something here. I want to be clear about that. You did something most people don't have the, I don't know what the word is." "Stubbornness," she said. He almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. "Sure," he said. "Stubbornness. Get some sleep, Dr. Carter." She set down the phone. Cole was sitting on the bench near the counter. He'd been there through the call, quiet and present, and he didn't say anything now. He just looked at her with the patient attention of a man who had learned to wait. She looked at the monitor. 4 feeds, quiet. The parking lot had the particular silver light of the hour before dawn, everything flattened and still and very clean after the day's rain. "They're safe," she said. Not to him specifically. To the room, maybe. To the night. Titan lifted his head from the floor, looked at her, then put his head back down. "Yeah," Cole said. She sat with her hands in her lap and felt the shape of the day from the inside. The glass and the pipe, and the form on the counter, and the audio device, and the shadow in the alley, and the phone on the corridor floor, and the empty barn, and the 31 minutes of typing on a borrowed hotspot at 3 in the morning, felt it settle into her body the way exhaustion settles when it finally has permission to arrive. She didn't cry. She wasn't built for that kind of release, hadn't been even before the accident rewired what she considered acceptable vulnerability. But she sat very still for a moment, and Cole sat very still across from her, and the clinic breathed around them, and in the back ward, Pickwick made the small unconscious sound that wire-haired terriers make when they've decided that wherever they are is safe enough to dream. At 5:10, as the parking lot light shifted from silver to the first gray-pink edge of morning, Evelyn's phone, the replacement cell Voss had arranged for her, buzzed with a text from a number she recognized. "Marcus. Saw the news alert. You okay?" She looked at it for a moment. Then she typed back. "Yes. 7:30. Bring coffee." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Already on it." She set the phone down. Cole said, "News alert?" "Local police scanner app. Half the town has it." She looked at the window coverings, the black plastic softening in the early light. "By 7, everyone within 6 blocks will know what happened here." "Is that a problem?" She considered it. "No," she said. "Actually, no, I don't think it is." She looked at the damaged counter, the cracked laminate, the cut cord on the floor that Garza had bagged and replaced, and somehow nobody had moved the original bag yet, so it was still sitting by the baseboard. Then she looked at Cole. "You should go home," she said. "Get some sleep." "In a while," he said. "Cole." "In a while," he said again, and looked at the monitor with the particular expression of a man who has decided something and has no intention of discussing it further. She let it go. Outside, the dawn was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not, and in 90 minutes the clinic would begin to fill again with the ordinary weight of living creatures who needed help, and the garbage bag windows would need to be scheduled for replacement, and there were 2 afternoon surgeries and a litter of kittens who needed their 2-week waits, and somewhere in a county shelter 90 minutes north, 14 animals in transit kennels were waking up in a place that, whatever else it was not moving. Evelyn put her hands on her wheels. She didn't go anywhere. She just sat with her hands there, ready. And on the floor between her and Cole, Titan slept on, breathing steadily, his side rising and falling in the gray light like something finally, improbably, at rest. Marcus arrived at 7:22 with 2 large coffees and a paper bag from the place on Fenwick that did breakfast sandwiches, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw Cole still on the bench, and Titan still on the floor, and Evelyn still behind the counter, and he said nothing about any of it. He set the coffee down, distributed the sandwiches, and went to the back ward to start morning rounds without being asked. That was the thing about Marcus. He understood what mattered and didn't make a production of understanding it. Evelyn drank the coffee and ate half the sandwich and watched the parking lot fill slowly with the particular quality of a Tuesday morning after something had happened. A few cars slowing as they passed. A neighbor from the dry cleaner standing outside his own entrance and looking at the covered windows with an expression she couldn't read from a distance. By 7:40, 3 separate people had texted her numbers she'd given out for clinic business, asking some version of the same question. "Are you okay?" "I saw the news," she answered them all the same way. "Yes." "Open as usual." Which wasn't entirely accurate. They weren't open yet, and the window situation meant the front of the clinic looked like the aftermath of something, which it was. But the intention behind the statement was true, and she was done being careful about which truths she released and in what order. Cole left at 8:15. He stood at the counter and looked at her in the direct, uncomplicated way he did most things, and said, "I'll check in later." "You don't have to." "I know." He didn't move immediately. He looked at Titan, who had gotten up when Cole stood and was now sitting at his left heel, watching Evelyn with the focused amber attention he'd been directing at her intermittently since the previous morning. "The program out of Virginia," Cole said. "The records on his history before acquisition. I can request them." She looked at him. "If you want confirmation," he said, "official documentation of the treatment record, the surgical notes. It would close the loop, formally." She understood what he was offering. Not just the records, the acknowledgement. The official version of something she already knew was true, but that currently existed only in her memory and in a scar behind a dog's ear. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." He nodded. Then he looked at Titan again. "Hey," he said. Titan looked at him. "We'll be back." He said it to the dog, not to Evelyn, and she understood that was its own form of precision. They left, and the clinic felt different after, not emptier exactly, but recalibrated, the way a room feels after something load-bearing has been temporarily relocated and you become aware of the space it usually occupies. She turned back to her counter. She had work to do. Philip Ransom was apprehended at a motel off the interstate 60 miles southeast of Ashgrove at 11:30 that morning. He'd paid cash and given a false name and would have been difficult to locate if his car, a distinctive dark green pickup with a cracked rear panel that Evelyn had noted in the Millhaven County Clinic's parking lot when she'd driven past it twice doing her reconnaissance, hadn't been spotted by a state trooper responding to a completely unrelated fender bender in the adjacent lot. The trooper had run the plate out of routine and gotten the bolo hit. Ransom didn't resist. He sat in the back of the patrol car with his hands in his lap and his mouth closed, and the particular look of a man who had spent the night doing math and had arrived at a number he didn't like. Ruiz called Evelyn at noon to tell her. "He's talking," Ruiz said, proactively. "His lawyer got here 40 minutes ago and apparently recommended cooperation, and Ransom he's talking a lot." "What is he saying?" "He's saying Cheel approached him 3 years ago. Said it started as a small arrangement, certifying animals for what Ransom was told were legitimate relocation operations. Ransom says he believed it for the first 6 months. And after that? After that, he took the money anyway." Ruiz said it flatly, without editorial, which was its own editorial. "He's offering names, people above Cheel in the structure. Apparently Blue Ridge Animal Relocation is a subsidiary. There's a larger operation out of state that's been using at least 4 regional networks for supply." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "How large?" she said. Large enough that the DA's office called the Federal Animal Crimes Unit at 8 this morning. A pause. Your 14 transactions were the visible surface of something significantly bigger. The full investigation is going to take time. But it's open. It's open, he said, and it's federal now, which means it has resources. Another pause. Cheel is still playing hardball with his lawyer, but with Ransom cooperating and the manifest evidence from Renfield, he doesn't have a lot of room. He'll fold. And Callow? The longest pause yet. Callow received payments from an account connected to Northfield Administrative Services over a 14-month period, Ruiz said. Total amount is still being tallied. He's been charged. He said it in the same flat tone he'd used for Ransom, but it was a different kind of flat, the kind that takes work to maintain. He's claiming he didn't know what the operation was, that he thought he was being paid for. He used the phrase, looking the other way on minor civil complaints. He knew what he was doing, Evelyn said. That'll be for a jury, Ruiz said. But yes, I think he knew. She looked at the repaired phone cord on the wall, the replacement handset, the monitor array still running its 4 feeds. Thank you for calling me, she said. You earned the update. He cleared his throat. The animals from Renfield are at the county shelter. They're requesting your assessment on Monday if you're available. I'm available? I figured. A pause that felt different from the professional ones, shorter and less processed. You should know what you built, the documentation, the cross-references, the backup copies, all of it. The federal unit called it the most complete civilian evidentiary package they've seen on an animal trafficking case at this scale. Their words. She didn't respond immediately. Don't tell me that expecting me to feel good about it, she said. No, he said. I'm telling you so you know it mattered. The 12 months you spent on it, the calls, all of it. A beat. It mattered. She looked at the cracked laminate on the counter where the pipe had hit. I know, she said. That's why I did it. The window contractor came at 2 o'clock, a woman named Priya who had an assistant and a van and who walked the window frames with a measuring tape and no reaction to the garbage bag plastic or the police tape residue on the exterior frames. She gave Evelyn a quote and a timeline. New glass in 4 to 5 days, boarding until then. And she said it with the professional neutrality of someone who had measured the aftermath of bad events enough times that the specific category of bad had stopped registering. Evelyn approved the quote on the spot. While Priya's assistant was beginning the boarding work, 3 things happened in close enough succession that Evelyn would remember them as simultaneous, even though they weren't. The first was a text from a vet in the next county over, a woman named Dr. Sasha Obi, who ran a large animal practice and who Evelyn had consulted with twice on the case file, who had provided 2 of the records Evelyn had cross-referenced, and who sent a message that said simply, heard, good. You want help rebuilding anything? Say the word. The second was Gerald Odom, arriving on foot in the parking lot. He was a big man, 60s, with the weathered, particular density of someone who had worked outdoors for most of his life. He stood at the edge of the parking lot and looked at the clinic and then came to the door and stood there without coming in. And when Evelyn rolled to the counter and looked at him through the half-boarded front, he said, I need to talk to you. She looked at him for a moment. Come in, she said. He came in and stood near the door and held his cap in both hands, which she hadn't seen him holding when he arrived, and she understood that the cap had come off in the parking lot before he'd even reached the door. That told her something. I didn't know, he said. What was in that barn? I knew there were animals. Cheel told me he was running a relocation service, legitimate, county licensed. He paid me for the use of the property. He looked at her. I didn't ask enough questions. No, she said. You didn't. I'm telling you because I told the police already this morning. I called Ruiz. I gave him the LLC structure, everything I had. He swallowed. I know it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't, she said. He nodded. He turned his cap in his hands. The dog you treated, he said. The one I brought in. The shepherd. The Malinois. Was she one of the ones they recovered? Evelyn looked at him. Yes, she said. He stood there for another moment. He looked like a man processing the specific weight of a mistake that can't be taken back but might, with significant effort, be partially compensated for. He put the cap back on and looked at the boarding work going up on the windows. I'm sorry, he said. She held his gaze. "Be more careful," she said, "about who you let use your land and for what. That's all." He left. Marcus came from the back ward and looked at the door. "Was that Odom?" he said. "Yes." "What did he want?" "To apologize." Marcus considered this. "You let him." "I'm not a judge," she said. "Ruiz can determine what he is." Marcus looked at her for a moment with the expression he sometimes got, the one that said he was seeing something he didn't quite have language for. Then he went back to work. The third thing that happened was a call from a number she didn't recognize, with a Portland area code. She answered it because Portland meant the Malinois and the family who'd lost her, and she'd been expecting this call even though she hadn't known when it would come. The woman on the other end said her name was Claire Delaney. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who had been crying recently and had stopped and was now in the phase of managed composure that takes effort to sustain. "The shelter gave me your number," she said. "They said you're the one who found the chip, the secondary chip." "Yes," Evelyn said. "She's been missing for 2 years." A pause. "My daughter named her. She was 8 when we got her. She's 10 now." Another pause. "We told her We didn't tell her at first that we thought Kira was gone. We just said she was missing. And then after a year, we had to explain that she probably wasn't coming back." Evelyn said nothing. She waited. "I'm sorry," Claire Delaney said. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this." "It's all right," Evelyn said. "I just wanted to—" "The shelter said you've been building this case for a year, that you kept records and you held on to the chip number, even when there was no obvious reason to think it would matter." A breath. "I wanted to say thank you. I know that's not enough, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly." Evelyn looked at the counter. At the folder she'd been adding to for 12 months, pages of cross-references and billing records and animal IDs, and one secondary chip number for a Belgian Malinois belonging to a family in Portland whose daughter had been 10 years old when she stopped expecting her dog to come home. "Your daughter's going to get her back," Evelyn said. Claire Delaney didn't answer immediately. The line was quiet except for the sound of breathing. "Yes," she said finally. "She is." After the call ended, Evelyn sat at the counter for a long time without doing anything in particular. The boarding work continued outside. Marcus moved through the back ward. The monitor ran its 4 quiet feeds. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the particular quality of completion that isn't happiness, but is something more durable. The sensation of a weight that has been carried so long you stopped noticing it as weight, and now it's slightly less, and the absence of it is what you feel rather than any positive thing. She would take it. The following weeks moved in the way weeks move after a crisis resolves, quickly in aggregate, slowly in the individual days. The windows went in on Thursday, real glass, and the clinic stopped smelling like wet garbage bag plastic and started smelling like itself again. Marcus repaired the instrument tray and reordered the supplies that had been damaged. Evelyn filed the insurance claim for the counter damage and the window replacement and the medical equipment that had been broken in the initial assault. And she did it with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the administrative aftermath of violence was its own form of recovery work, and that ignoring it didn't make it go away. The federal investigation moved faster than she'd expected. The Animal Crimes Unit had resources and a multi-state jurisdiction and the cooperation of a talking witness in Ransom, and within the first 10 days they had identified 6 other regional networks connected to the same primary operation. Evelyn received periodic updates from a federal agent named Torres, who was professional and precise, and who asked her twice to clarify specific elements of her documentation with the manner of someone who had found the documentation genuinely useful and wanted to make sure he was reading it correctly. She clarified it both times. She didn't ask for credit. Martin Cheel stopped playing hardball on day 11, when Ransom's cooperation produced enough corroborating evidence that Cheel's lawyer apparently did the math and advised a different strategy. She called Evelyn on the day the appointment was announced, not to discuss it, but to ask about the clinic's boarding hours for a cat she'd found in her garage. "Tuesday through Saturday, 8 to 6, Evelyn said. "I'll bring him in Saturday," Voss said. "He's been fed and he seems healthy, but he needs a real check." "Bring him in," Evelyn said. "First appointment's on me." A short pause. "You don't have to do that," Voss said. "I know," Evelyn said. "Saturday, 8 o'clock. Oh, Cole came back on a Thursday, 10 days after the morning with the windows. He called first, which she appreciated, and he arrived with Titan at 9:15 after the first rush of morning appointments and before the afternoon's surgical prep. He came through the front entrance, new glass, properly sealed, the frame repainted where it had been scuffed during installation, and he stood at the counter and looked at the clinic with the assessing attention he turned on spaces, the brief inventory that was too quick to look deliberate but too complete to be casual. "Better," he said. "Getting there," she said. He placed a manila envelope on the counter. "Records from the Virginia program," he said. His intake file, treatment history, the surgical notes from his original injury stabilization. He looked at her. "It's all there." She picked up the envelope. Didn't open it. "Thank you," she said. "The intake notes say the treating veterinarian couldn't be identified," he said. "Mobile operation, no permanent address on file. But the surgical technique is documented, the suture pattern, the needle type." He paused. "Whoever read those notes could identify the work." She held the envelope. "I already know it's mine," she said. "I know you do." He looked at her. "Now there's a record." She understood. Not just the closure, the acknowledgement in a form that existed outside of her own certainty. The difference between knowing something and having it exist in the world in a form that other people could see. She set the envelope down and looked at Titan. He was watching her with the settled attention he'd had from the beginning. Not anxious, not performing, just present in the specific way he was present with the people he'd decided were his. "How is he?" she said. "Good," Cole said. "He's been better, actually, since last week." He looked at the dog with the same quality of attention Titan was directing at Evelyn, mutual and without embarrassment. "He's been easier in general, more settled." She thought about what that meant. About an animal who had been lost and then found and then lost again in the way that animals get lost. Not to distance, but to the gap between one life and another, and what it did to the interior of a creature to have that gap suddenly close, even partially. "He knows something resolved," she said. "Probably." She came around from behind the counter. She stopped next to Titan and put her hand on the side of his neck, and he leaned into it the same way he had on the exam table. Not a trained response, just a preference, the specific weight of a dog who has decided where he belongs. "I'd like him to come in on a regular basis," she said. "Not for medical, just to be here, with the other animals. Some of the rescues do better with a settled dog in the space. It helps the anxious ones calibrate." Cole looked at her. "Therapy work," he said. "I'd call it presence," she said. "He wouldn't have to do anything, just be here." Cole was quiet for a moment. "How often?" he said. "Once a week, a few hours. You could stay or not, depending on your schedule." He looked at Titan. Titan looked at Evelyn. "We could do that," Cole said. On the Monday of the third week, Evelyn drove 90 minutes north to the county shelter in Renfield. She went alone. Marcus had offered to come and she'd said no, not because she didn't want the company, but because some things worked better as a private accounting. Just you and the thing you'd been working toward, without witnesses softening the edges of it. The shelter director was a compact, efficient man named Hoffman, who met her in the parking lot and walked her through the facility with the slightly apologetic speed of someone who is proud of what they do and aware that it could always be more. The animals from the transit van had been assessed by their own vet staff and separated by condition and origin, and the identification process was underway using her documentation as the primary reference. 11 of the 14 had been matched to their records. 3 were still in process. Hoffman walked her down the main kennel corridor and stopped at the 4th enclosure on the left. The Belgian Malinois stood up when Evelyn stopped her chair. She was smaller than Evelyn had imagined from the chip registration, lean and compact, with the tight, high-alert musculature of the breed, and a coat that was mostly black with the tan points coming in at the muzzle and chest. One ear had a small notch in it that hadn't been in any record, which meant it had happened during the 2 years she'd been missing, and she would never know what it had been from. Kira, that was the name on the registration, the name an 8-year-old girl had given her, looked at Evelyn with the amber eyes that all of them had, the ones that carried more intelligence than was comfortable to think about for too long. Evelyn looked back. "Hey," she said quietly. The dog pressed her nose against the kennel door. Evelyn put 2 fingers against the mesh, and the dog pressed her muzzle to them and was still. "You're going home," Evelyn said. The dog's tail moved once, low and slow, not a greeting wag, something quieter. The kind of movement that an animal makes when it is not reacting to something external, but processing something internal, some information that has arrived from a source that isn't sight or smell or sound. Evelyn stayed there for 3 minutes without speaking. Then she straightened up and finished the walk with Hoffman and provided her assessment notes on the remaining 3 unmatched animals and confirmed the identification documentation for the 11 who had been matched. She drove back to Ash Grove in the flat October light, the highway unremarkable in the way highways are when you're driving through the end of something. And she let the distance compress behind her without trying to organize what she felt about it. She was 31 years old. She had rebuilt her practice after an accident that had taken her ability to walk and had not taken anything else. Not her precision, not her patience, not the specific quality of attention she paid to living things that couldn't tell her what was wrong. She had spent 12 months building something that the people it inconvenienced had tried, in the space of one rainy Tuesday morning, to destroy in the belief that she would not fight them. She had fought them. Not gracefully, not without fear, not without the long nights and the threatening calls and the months of carrying information she wasn't sure would ever get used. Not without a Navy SEAL who happened to have a booster appointment, or a tech who went back to work without being asked, or a detective who had been too slow and had ended up being just fast enough, or a dog who had walked into the right room at the right moment and put his head in her lap, like the intervening years were a sentence he was finishing rather than a story he was starting. Nothing about it had been clean. It had simply been true. 6 weeks after the morning with the windows, a girl named Sophie Delaney, who had just turned 11, came through the doors of Ash Grove Animal Care with her mother and a carrier that contained a Belgian Malinois with a notched ear who had been home for 8 days and was reportedly eating well and sleeping on the end of Sophie's bed and following her from room to room with a focused dedication that had not lessened since the moment they'd been reunited at the Renfield shelter. Claire Delaney had called ahead. She'd said Sophie wanted to say thank you in person, and she'd asked if they could come, and Evelyn had said yes. Sophie was small for 11, with serious eyes and the slightly formal manner of a child who has been thinking carefully about what she was going to say. She came to the counter and looked at Evelyn, and then she said, "I made you something." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. It was a drawing, colored pencil, careful, the kind of drawing that takes a long time and shows it. A woman in a wheelchair and a dog, and around them a bright, improbably yellow clinic with windows that caught the light. Evelyn took it. She looked at it for a moment without speaking. "It's really good," she said. "My teacher helped me with the perspective," Sophie said seriously. "The wheelchair was hard." "It looks right to me." "Thank you for keeping the chip number," Sophie said. "My mom explained about the chip, that you kept the number even when there wasn't a reason yet." Evelyn looked at her. "There was always a reason," Evelyn said. "I just didn't know what it was going to turn into yet." Sophie thought about this with the focused seriousness she seemed to apply to most things. "Okay," she said. "That makes sense." Then she turned to Titan, who was lying near the counter. It was Thursday, one of his regular days now, and he had been in the clinic since 10. And she looked at him, and he looked at her with the polite, calibrated attention he gave to unknown quantities. "Can I pet him?" she said. Evelyn looked at Cole, who was on the bench near the counter. "Yes," he said. "He's friendly." Sophie crouched down with the unself-conscious flexibility of 11 and put her hand out, and Titan sniffed it, and then accepted her hand on his ear with the dignity of a dog who understands that being petted is a social function he's equipped to perform. Sophie looked up at her mother. Something moved through her face. Relief, and something else. Something that didn't have an 11-year-old word for it, but that adults recognized as the specific exhale of a thing that has been feared for a long time, finally losing its power. Kira pressed against Sophie's leg from inside the carrier, and Sophie put her other hand down, and for a moment she had a hand on each of them, the dog she'd recovered and the dog she'd just met. And the clinic held that for a second like a frame. Marcus, from the supply corridor, was definitively not looking at anyone. Evelyn put the drawing on the counter in front of her. She smoothed the fold lines with her thumb and looked at the yellow clinic with its light-catching windows, and thought that it was a better version than the real thing, the way drawings of places always are, simplified, clarified, with all the garbage bag plastic and cracked laminate edited out, leaving only the shape of what it was supposed to be. She would hang it on the wall above the reception counter. It would be the first thing people saw when they walked in. That afternoon, after the Delaney's left and the last surgical case had been cleared and Marcus had locked the back ward and said goodnight, Evelyn stayed at the counter in the quiet that she'd learned to treat as its own kind of company. Titan was asleep on the floor again, Cole reading something on his phone on the bench, neither of them in a particular hurry. The monitor ran its 4 feeds. The parking lot was empty and still and caught the late afternoon light cleanly through windows that were no longer plastic. She thought about the 12 months of the case file, and the morning with the glass, and the phone on the corridor floor, and the empty barn, and the 4:40 call, and the 90-minute drive north, and a girl named Sophie, and a notched ear, and a chip number she'd held onto because discarding it had felt like admitting something she wasn't prepared to admit. She thought about Titan's scar. She thought about the fact that some things find their way back, not because the world is arranged in their favor, but because the people holding the thread refuse to let go of it. That was all it ever was, in the end. Not luck, not design, just someone deciding that a thing mattered and continuing to act on that decision past the point where it was comfortable, past the point where it was safe, all the way to the point where it became true. Cole looked up from his phone. "Ready?" he said. She looked at the clinic, at the drawing on the wall, at the dog on the floor. "Yeah," she said. "Let's close up." She turned off the monitor. Cole stood. Titan stood with him. Evelyn rolled to the light panel by the door and went through the switches one by one, the way she did every evening. Exam room, supply corridor, back ward, reception. And the clinic settled into the particular darkness that buildings hold when they're empty but not abandoned. She locked the door. Outside, the evening air was cold and clear, and the street was quiet in the way small towns are quiet at the end of a day that wasn't extraordinary by any measure, except the one that matters. Everyone inside had come in hurt and gone home better, and the hands responsible for that had shown up anyway, every day, regardless of what was being broken around them. The deepest loyalty doesn't announce itself, it just stays, past the point of reason, past the point of safety, until the thing it was protecting finally has room to survive.